Um, when a child goes missing in America, we plaster their face on every screen we can find.
Yeah, every billboard, every telephone pole.
Right, exactly, until they're found. The immediate human instinct is to just shine as much light as possible into the dark.
To make that missing person completely impossible to ignore.
Yes. But what happens when the entity taking the child is a global superpower? Like, what happens when the disappearance is actually the system itself?
Right, like a vast state-sponsored bureaucracy.
Yeah, a machine meticulously designed to make a human being legally vanish, just right in plain sight.
It completely flips the concept of a search and rescue on its head. I mean, you aren't fighting a lack of information in some chaotic environment. You are fighting an administrative machine that is actively manufacturing the erasure of an identity.
And that incredibly dark, complex reality is exactly what we're getting into today. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are so glad you were here with us.
It's a heavy one today, for sure.
It really is.
Yeah.
Our mission today is to explore a highly detailed, deeply unsettling set of materials regarding the ongoing war in Ukraine. Specifically, we're focusing on the mass movement of Ukrainian children into Russia.
And, it is a heavy topic, but it's an incredibly important one to understand structurally. The sheer mechanics of how something like this happens in the 21st century is just vital to unpack.
Absolutely. Now, before we get into those mechanisms, we need to talk about where our information is coming from today.
Right, the sources.
Yeah. So our sources for this deep dive are centered around an independent accountability journalism organization called Impeach 47. Now, Impeach 47 describes itself as openly anti-authoritarian and anti-corruption.
Yeah, they have a very distinct lens.
They do. They're driven by a very specific editorial perspective, and they cover everything from like the Trump administration's political landscape to these massive international affairs like the war in Ukraine.
Right, and they are very upfront about that lens. I mean, they state clearly that they are not neutral on values like democracy and accountable government.
Right.
But their stated goal is to be entirely factual in their reporting. So they rely on public records, government filings, and synthesized data to build their case and, combat impunity.
Which brings me to a crucial disclaimer for you, our listener, before we really dive in. We are dealing with highly politically charged content today.
Very charged.
Yeah. And I want to make it unequivocally clear that we, as your hosts, are not taking any sides here.
Right.
You're not endorsing the viewpoints, the political stances, or the editorial framing of Impeach 47, or honestly any other entity we might mention today.
We're just the messengers.
Exactly. Our sole job today, our only mission, is to impartially report on the content provided to us. We are here to convey the ideas, the data, and the legal findings contained in the original source materials so that you can understand the sheer scope of what is being alleged and documented.
Yeah. We are looking at the architecture of the claims and the evidence they present, acting as your guides through the material, nothing more.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are looking specifically at an April 29, 2026 report from Impeach 47, and it centers on a staggering claim.
The systematic deportation of nearly 20,000 Ukrainian children.
Right, nearly 20,000. According to the source, the Ukrainian Ministry of Justice has officially verified that 19,915 Ukrainian children have been transferred into Russian custody since the full-scale invasion began back in February 2022.
And on top of that, an organization called Bring Kids Back Ukraine is currently tracking possible abductions and forced transfers of approximately 20,000 children.
Yeah.
But the word to focus on there is verified.
Oh, interesting. What do you mean?
Well, the Ministry of Justice isn't just putting out a rough estimate based on, regional census drops.
Right.
That 19,915 number, that represents specific documented cases of children who have crossed the border into Russian-controlled territory.
Man, and the discrepancy in the data is what just stops you in your tracks.
Yeah.
Because out of those nearly 20,000 children, the report notes that just over 2,000 have been returned.
Barely 10%.
I was trying to wrap my head around this scale, and I keep coming back to this visual. Imagine an entire school district.
Wow, yeah.
Think of every single child in a small American city. Every elementary school, every middle school, every high school.
All of them.
Now imagine every single one of those desks empty tomorrow. Every single child vanishing overnight into a foreign country.
It's chilling when you put it like that.
It is.
Yeah.
But when we look at a number that massive, how does a reporting organization even begin to verify each individual case, especially without access to the other side's data?
Well, what's fascinating here is the absolute forensic rigor required to find them, because you were dealing with a total black box.
Right. Russia isn't just handing over a spreadsheet.
Exactly. So researchers rely heavily on open source intelligence, or OSINT. Groups like Yale's Humanitarian Research Lab, whose findings feature prominently in this report, are actually scraping Russian social media platforms.
Wait, like what kind of platform?
Like VKontakte, which is basically the Russian equivalent of Facebook.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and they monitor regional Russian television networks for propaganda broadcasts.
Looking for what, exactly?
Well, say a local governor is welcoming a new group of quote-unquote rescued orphans from Mariupol to a town in Siberia. That gets broadcast on local news.
Oh, wow. So they are taking these promotional videos, grabbing the faces of the children from the footage, and running facial recognition against databases of missing kids in Ukraine.
Precisely that. It's incredibly tedious work. They cross-reference that visual data with Ukrainian school registries, orphanage records, hospital logs that were left behind.
Just piecing it together.
Yeah, and they also track administrative breadcrumbs. Because when a child is absorbed into a new societal structure, the state has to generate paperwork.
Right, you can't just exist without a paper trail.
Exactly. So researchers monitor regional Russian databases for sudden, inexplicable spikes in newly issued birth certificates for older children in specific districts.
Wow.
And Impeach 47 aggregates all this hard data. They are essentially tracing the administrative exhaust of a massive bureaucracy.
The administrative exhaust. That's a powerful way to frame it. And, that transition from gathering data to looking at the bureaucracy itself forces us to look at the intention behind the numbers.
I feel that.
Because you don't just accidentally load an entire small city's worth of kids onto buses and trains.
No, you really don't.
To absorb 20,000 people, you need a pipeline. And the source material points to a highly systemic infrastructure that was actually built before the war even started.
Yeah, this is where it gets really dark. The report brings in formal findings from the UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine, which was released in March 2026.
And what did they find?
The commission found that Russian authorities actively coordinated legislative, administrative, and practical measures to facilitate these exact deportations.
Wow.
They literally changed their own domestic adoption laws to fast-track Russian citizenship for Ukrainian children.
Just to bypass the usual multi-year waiting periods.
Exactly, bypassing standard international protocols completely.
And they did this in the days immediately preceding Russia's full-scale invasion. Like before the tanks even rolled across the border, the legal paperwork to absorb these children was already drafted and signed.
Yeah, the ink was already dry.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
The UN Commission's explicit conclusion was that this program was conceived and executed at the highest levels of the Russian Federation's leadership. It is state policy.
It completely dismantles the idea that this was a chaotic, improvised byproduct of soldiers moving through a combat zone.
Right. It wasn't an accident.
Not at all. Think about the infrastructure required to move a child from a war zone, process them through a filtration camp, ship them thousands of miles deep into Russian territory, strip their original citizenship, and place them with a newly vetted Russian family.
It requires massive coordination.
It requires dozens of government agencies working in perfect synchronization.
Let me push back here for a second, or at least play devil's advocate using the arguments mentioned in the source material.
Sure, go ahead.
If I'm reading the Russian state's defense correctly, they are arguing that this is a humanitarian evacuation. They claim they are moving vulnerable kids away from falling bombs.
Right, the rescue narrative.
Yeah. And under international law, evacuating civilians, especially children, from a crossfire is perfectly legal and honestly often required, right?
It is, yeah.
So where exactly is the legal line crossed from a lawful, quote-unquote, evacuation to what the UN is calling an enforced disappearance?
This raises an important question, and it really gets to the core of international humanitarian law. The line is crossed at the point of concealment and the severing of identity.
Okay, unpack that for me.
In a lawful wartime evacuation, the goal is temporary safety. The evacuating power is legally obligated to register the civilians, maintain their original national identity, and keep meticulous logs of their whereabouts.
So you always know who they are and where they came from.
Right. And most importantly, they have to coordinate with the opposing side or neutral parties like the Red Cross to facilitate their immediate return once it is safe.
But the report details how Russia has flat out refused to provide a list of the children taken to Russia to Ukrainian authorities.
Exactly.
They are actively blocking the Red Cross from accessing these facilities.
And that refusal to share information is the mechanism of the disappearance. Furthermore, you have documentary evidence of force.
Right.
The source cites an April 2026 report from Euronews that documented Ukrainian children being taken from the Kherson region at literal gunpoint.
At gunpoint.
Yeah.
That totally shatters the humanitarian rescue narrative right there.
Completely. Once these children cross the border, they aren't placed in temporary refugee housing to wait out the war. They are subjected to a process of legal erasure.
You know, it sounds less like an evacuation and more like identity laundering.
That's a good way to put it.
Think about money laundering, right? Where you wash illicit funds through a maze of shell companies until the money comes out the other side looking completely legitimate.
Yeah.
Here, the state is washing human identities. They take a Ukrainian child, run them through this bureaucratic maze of filtration camps and expedited citizenship courts, and they emerge on the other side with pristine Russian birth certificates, Russian names, and Russian families.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. And we have brand new data to show how permanent that laundering process is intended to be.
The Yale data.
Yes.
Okay.
The source introduces findings from Yale's Humanitarian Research Lab, published on April 28, 2026, which was just a day before the Impeach 47 report came out.
Right.
Yale researchers identified 314 specific Ukrainian children who were transferred to Russia explicitly for coerced adoption.
Cool. Like, let's clarify that term for a second, because the distinction really matters. Coerced adoption is fundamentally different from fostering, correct?
Vastly different. Fostering is a temporary guardianship arrangement. The state still recognizes the child belongs elsewhere eventually. But adoption is a permanent legal severing of the child's prior familial ties. Under international law, you cannot adopt children from another country during an armed conflict.
Why is that explicitly forbidden?
Precisely because the chaos makes it impossible to verify if the parents are actually dead or simply displaced and desperately looking for their child.
Oh, wow.
So by formalizing these adoptions, the state is permanently extinguishing the child's original legal identity against their will, or the will of their actual guardians back in Ukraine.
So Russia essentially controls the narrative on the ground, creating this massive administrative black box to hide the identity laundering.
Exactly.
But as we've seen from the open source intelligence, you simply cannot hide 20,000 people from satellites, data scrapers, and global watchdogs.
It's just too many people.
Right. Which brings us to how the international community is responding to this pipeline. Because the UN Commission's March 2026 conclusion didn't just condemn the actions. They issued a formal legal finding that Russian authorities committed crimes against humanity.
And that is the highest, heaviest threshold available in international criminal law.
Really? More than war crime?
Yes. A war crime can be an isolated incident, right? Like a rogue unit committing an atrocity on the battlefield.
Right.
But a crime against humanity has a very specific mechanical definition. It means the act is widespread, systematic, and directed against a civilian population as part of a state policy.
Which fits the pre-planned laws perfectly.
Exactly. The UN explicitly listed deportation, forcible transfer of children, and their enforced disappearance as the crimes committed.
And the consensus backing up that UN finding is just massive. The Impeach 47 report points out that multiple distinct organizations are looking at the exact same data and coming to the same horrifying conclusion.
It's across the board.
Yeah, we have the UN's Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the OHCHR, documenting the human rights violations. You have the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, which is a nonpartisan think tank tracking the national security implications. You have the Atlantic Council analyzing the geopolitical strategy behind it, and of course, Yale doing all the forensic data work. The United States House of Representatives even passed a resolution describing these mass abductions as an act of genocide.
It is incredibly rare to see academic researchers, human rights watchdogs, national legislative bodies, and international legal tribunals all perfectly aligned on the mechanics of an ongoing event.
Yeah, it really is.
And this consensus actually started years earlier. The report reminds us that the International Criminal Court, the ICC, issued an active arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin back in March 2023.
Specifically for the unlawful deportation of children.
Yes.
And an ICC warrant for a sitting head of state is incredibly rare.
Almost unheard of.
They went after this specific crime, the deportation of children, because the paper trail for administrative crimes is undeniable. It's quite literally signed by government officials.
Exactly.
But here's where it gets really interesting and honestly incredibly frustrating as a human being reading this.
Yeah.
The source explicitly notes that all of these UN findings, these historic ICC warrants, these congressional resolutions, they quote, do not change the number of missing kids.
Right. The kids are still gone.
Those 18,000 children are still out there. So my question is, does all this legal documentation actually help get a single child back today, or is this purely a bureaucratic exercise for the history books?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is true that a UN report or an ICC warrant doesn't physically unlock a door in Novosibirsk and put a child on a train home tomorrow.
Right. It doesn't physically save them today.
No, it doesn't. The immediate physical retrieval of these children remains agonizingly slow. But what the source argues is that these findings are not just for the history books. They serve a vital, real-time function.
Which is what?
They permanently alter the legal record of responsibility.
Okay, how does that work in practice, like on a geopolitical level?
Well, by meticulously documenting the pipeline, the specific regional governors involved, the television broadcasts, the legislative measures, the names of the camps, by doing all that, these institutions are preventing the erasure of the crime scene.
Ah, I see.
They are utilizing universal jurisdiction and real-time evidence gathering to build the prosecution's case right now.
So they're getting ready for the aftermath.
Exactly. It ensures that when the war eventually ends, or when any post-war negotiations occur, the return of these children isn't treated as some peripheral humanitarian request.
Like an afterthought at a peace treaty.
Right. It remains a legally mandated requirement for the lifting of warrants and sanctions. The perpetrators are boxed in. They can never claim they were just conducting a chaotic evacuation because the legal baseline has been set.
They're preserving the truth so it can't be paved over by state propaganda down the line.
Exactly. The documentation is the anchor.
So what does this all mean? We started this deep dive looking at a specific piece of accountability journalism from Impeach 47. Through their synthesis of data from Yale, the UN, and various global watchdogs, we've mapped out a highly coordinated, pre-planned pipeline.
A pipeline designed for erasure.
Right. We've seen a system that has moved nearly 20,000 children into a foreign country, subjected them to a process of identity laundering, and absorbed them into the new society through coerced adoptions.
Just terrifying.
And we've seen how this program is now legally recognized by the highest bodies of international law as a crime against humanity.
And for you listening, in an era where we are all absolutely bombarded with information overload, daily news fatigue, and competing narratives, this story really represents the vital importance of independent documentation.
Definitely.
When the fog of war descends, the first casualty is almost always the truth. What this source material shows is how open-source researchers, journalists, and legal bodies can painstakingly build a factual record, piece by piece.
Against all odds, really.
Yeah. It proves that even when a state apparatus tries to make 20,000 human beings vanish administratively, the evidence of their existence and the evidence of their theft can remain in the light if we know how to look for it.
It requires a relentless refusal to look away. But I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder as we wrap up today, something that builds on the reality of this source material.
What's that?
Well, we've talked a lot about the legal mechanisms of erasure and the forensic effort to track these kids down. But consider the human element of what happens next.
The aftermath.
Yeah. If thousands of these children have been integrated into Russian schools for years, if they have been given completely new Russian names, new legal identities, and raised by new families,
Wow.
what does the process of return even look like a decade from now?
That's a haunting question.
How do you physically, legally, and psychologically find a child who has been administratively erased, and then navigate the trauma of a young person who has been raised for their entire formative life to believe they are someone else entirely?
The psychological toll is just unimaginable.
The echoes of this pipeline are going to last for generations after the guns go silent.
Without a doubt.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep looking beneath the surface of the headlines.